My 5-year-old son has an imaginary friend who tells him things that are going to happen, and they always come true. At first, it didn't seem strange to me. Kids have imaginary friends all the time, right? My sister had one when she was little. His name was Captain Bubbles, and she talked about him until she was 7. No one ever worried about it. My wife had one too when she was a child. She said her imaginary friend was named Lily, and that she used to teach her songs. It's supposed to be a normal phase. Psychologists say it can even be a sign of creativity and intelligence. But my son Ethan's imaginary friend isn't like those. He calls him the Gray Man. Ethan started talking about him when he turned 4. One morning during breakfast, he looked at me and said, "Dad, the Gray Man says it's going to rain a lot today, and that you shouldn't take the red car." My wife and I looked at each other, then just went along with it. "Oh yeah?" I asked. "Why does he say that?" "Because the red car is going to have a problem." It was July. The sky was completely clear. There wasn't a single cloud, and the forecast said nothing about rain. I laughed it off and went to work in the red car like always. That afternoon, a storm hit out of nowhere. Not just rain, a real storm. The kind no one expected. The news later said it was the worst in over 20 years. Several streets downtown flooded. And in the parking lot where I always left my car, a tree had fallen, right on top of it. When I got there, my red car was completely crushed. If I had still been inside, I wouldn't be here. I went home that night, still trying to process everything. Ethan was sitting at the table eating dinner like nothing had happened. He looked at me and said, "The Gray Man says he told you." My wife stared at me with wide eyes. I sat down slowly, trying to understand what I had just lived through. A 4-year-old had warned me about a storm no one predicted. And about a tree falling exactly where my car would be. Coincidence, I told myself. It had to be. The second time happened about a month later. Ethan was playing in the living room when he suddenly stopped. He just froze, staring at the empty corner of the room. Then he said, "Dad, the Gray Man says Grandma Linda is going to fall down the stairs tomorrow, and she's going to hurt her hip. We need to tell her not to go down the stairs. Grandma Linda is my mother. She's 71 and lives alone." I called her, not because I believed it, but because it felt wrong not to. I told her to be careful with the stairs. She laughed, said she had been using those stairs for 40 years and wasn't about to fall now. The next day, around 3 in the afternoon, she fell. She slipped on the stairs, fractured her hip, and spent 3 months recovering. When I came back from the hospital and got home, Ethan was waiting near the door. "The Gray Man says Grandma will be okay," he told me, "but next time, you should listen." That night, my wife and I had our first serious conversation about the Gray Man. She was scared, but she tried to explain it. "Kids notice things," she said. "Maybe Ethan saw that your mom was losing balance and just turned it into a prediction. And the storm, maybe he saw something on TV." I asked her if she really thought our 4-year-old had analyzed my mother's balance and predicted a broken hip. She didn't answer. The third time, that was the one that changed everything. That was the one that took my sleep away. Ethan came into our room at 3 in the morning. He touched my face with his cold little hand and said, "Dad, the Gray Man is here. He wants me to tell you something." I sat up immediately. "What does he want to say?" "Not to me," Ethan said. "To you." My wife was asleep next to me. Then Ethan said, "He says Mom's baby isn't going to make it." I sat up straight. My wife was 5 weeks pregnant. We hadn't told anyone. Not family, not friends, no one. Ethan wasn't supposed to know. There was no way he could know. "How do you know Mom is having a baby?" I asked. "The Gray Man told me," he said. "He says the baby is sick. And Mom is going to be sad, but she'll be okay later." I woke my wife up and told her everything. She turned pale. The next morning, we went to the doctor. They ran tests. It was an ectopic pregnancy. If we hadn't caught it early, it could have turned into a serious emergency. The doctor said we were lucky to come in so soon. Lucky. It wasn't luck. It was the Gray Man. My wife lost the pregnancy, but the doctor said finding it early probably saved her life. When we got home, Ethan was sitting on the floor drawing. He looked at us and said, "The Gray Man says don't be sad. He says you're going to have another baby next year, and it's going to be a girl." I didn't ask him anything else. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own son, not of Ethan, but of whatever was behind him, of whatever the Gray Man was, and how it knew things no one should be able to know. That was when I stopped being able to ignore it. Up until that point, I had been forcing myself to believe everything had some kind of explanation. Coincidences, timing, luck. Anything that made sense. But after that night, it stopped feeling like coincidence. It started feeling like something else. Something I didn't understand. And something I didn't control. A few days later, my wife and I decided to take Ethan to see a child psychologist. Her name was Dr. Miller. She had been working with kids for over 30 years. Calm voice, professional smile, the kind of person who makes you feel like everything is going to be okay the moment you walk in. She listened carefully while I explained everything. The storm, my mother's fall, the pregnancy. As I spoke, I noticed something change in her expression. The smile didn't disappear completely, but it faded. By the time I finished, she was serious. Not alarmed, but definitely not relaxed anymore. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "what you're describing doesn't match the typical pattern of an imaginary friend. I felt my stomach tighten. She continued. Imaginary friends are usually extensions of a child's mind. They reflect emotions, fears, creativity, but they don't provide new information, especially not information the child couldn't possibly know. She paused for a second. The pregnancy concerns me the most. There's no logical way your son could have known that. I didn't like the way she said that. So what are you saying? I asked. She hesitated, and that hesitation scared me more than anything else she could have said. I don't know, she admitted. Then she added, but I'd like to speak with Ethan. The session lasted about an hour. My wife and I watched from behind a glass window while Ethan sat in a small room filled with toys. Dr. Miller spoke to him gently, like she had done this 1,000 times. Ethan, she said, can you tell me about your friend, the gray man? He's my friend, Ethan answered simply. He comes to visit me. What does he look like? He's tall and gray, like his name. Does he have a face? Ethan shook his head. No. But he has a voice. What does his voice sound like? Ethan thought for a moment. It sounds like when you touch a cold window in winter. It's cold, but soft. Dr. Miller paused at that. I saw her glance briefly toward the glass where we were watching. Then she continued. How long has he been visiting you? Ethan answered without hesitation. Always. Always? She asked. What do you mean? Since before. Before what? Ethan looked at her like the answer was obvious. Before me. That made her stop. Not completely, but enough. Before you? She repeated. What does that mean? The gray man says he was here first, Ethan said. He says the house is his. He lived here before we did, and we live here because he let us. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. Our house. We bought it 6 years ago, before Ethan was born. It was old, over 80 years old. We renovated most of it, but the structure itself was still the same. The previous owner had died there. That was all we knew. Ethan kept talking, completely calm. The gray man wakes me up sometimes at night and tells me things, he said. Like what? Dr. Miller asked. He told me that before us there was a family here. They had a dog named Sunny, and the man who lived here got very sad one day and stopped getting out of bed. Dr. Miller slowly looked toward the glass again. This time, she held the look a little longer. I knew exactly what she was thinking, because I was thinking the same thing. The previous owner, he died in that house, alone. When the session ended, Dr. Miller asked to speak with us privately. We sat across from her in a small office. For the first time since we met her, she didn't look confident. She looked careful. I can't explain what your son is describing, she said, but I can tell you what it isn't. She leaned forward slightly. There are no signs of a psychological disorder. This is not early schizophrenia. It's not dissociation. Ethan is a healthy child. Emotionally and cognitively, he's exactly where he should be. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. She continued. He believes what he's saying, completely, and the information he's given you has been accurate. My wife crossed her arms tightly. So, what are we supposed to do? She asked. Dr. Miller hesitated again, and again, that hesitation said everything. This goes beyond my field, she admitted. Then, more quietly, she added, but if you're asking for my personal opinion, not my professional one, she stopped, then finished the sentence anyway. I think there is something in that house communicating with your son. We drove home in silence. My wife was driving. I couldn't focus. Ethan had fallen asleep in the back seat. When we got home, I carried him to his room. As I laid him down, he opened his eyes for just a second, half asleep. Dad, he whispered. The gray man says not to be afraid. I froze. He continued, barely awake. He says he's taking care of this family, but there's something under the house you need to find before winter. My chest tightened. What do you mean? I asked. Ethan's eyes were already closing again. He says, if you don't find it before the first cold, someone in this house is going to go to sleep and not wake up. Then he fell asleep, just like that. I stood there for a few seconds. Then I walked out of the room slowly. My wife was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed. She looked at me and said, you heard that, right? Yeah. What do we do? I took a breath. I don't know, but tomorrow I'm going to check under the house. Our house has a basement, or at least it had one. When we bought the place, the inspector told us it wasn't safe, said the structure was unstable, recommended sealing it off completely. So we did. The entrance was in the backyard. We covered it with a concrete slab during the first year, and we never touched it again. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what Ethan said, about the timing, about winter, about what not waking up really meant. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m., grabbed a shovel, and went to the backyard. Ethan was already awake, standing by the window in his room on the second floor, still wearing his dinosaur pajamas, watching me, his hand pressed against the glass. I nodded at him. He didn't move. He just kept watching. I started digging around the edges of the concrete slab. The dirt was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just more tired than I thought. I tried not to think too much. Physical work helped. It kept my mind busy. My wife was still inside, or pretending to be asleep. At that point, it didn't make much difference. By 7:30, I had cleared enough around the edges. I pushed the shovel underneath and used it as leverage. The sound it made when it lifted was heavy, dull, like something that hadn't been opened in a long time, like something that had been sealed on purpose. The basement wasn't deep, just a short set of stone steps going down about 10 feet. At the bottom, a small room, low ceiling, brick walls, no finishing. I turned on the flashlight and stepped down carefully. The stairs were slippery, no railing. I kept one hand on the wall the whole way down. When I reached the bottom, I realized almost immediately that I hadn't come down there looking for the right thing. because the first things I saw changed everything. The first thing I saw were the bones. They were small, carefully placed in the corner of the room inside a wooden box without a lid. It looked like it had once been a toolbox. They were clearly animal bones, but what stood out wasn't what they were. It was how they were arranged. Someone had placed them there on purpose, carefully, with time, with intention. Right next to them, there was a small metal plate, old, rusted. I pointed the flashlight at it and leaned closer until I could read the engraving. Sunny, good dog, always here. I stopped moving completely. For a few seconds, I didn't even breathe. The same name Ethan had mentioned. A dog that had lived in this house before we ever did. A dog he had no possible way of knowing about. I forced myself to keep looking, because if I stopped there, I knew I wouldn't go any further, and I needed to find whatever the gray man had told me to find. The second thing I noticed was in the center of the room, a makeshift table, just a few stacked bricks with a wooden board on top. On it, there was a metal box. Old, rectangular, the kind people used years ago to store papers. The lock was completely rusted. When I lifted the lid, it opened without resistance. Inside, there were photographs, letters, and a notebook. I picked up the photos first, shined the light over them. An older man, white hair, sitting in the backyard of this same house. A light-colored dog at his feet. I turned one of the photos over. There was a name written on the back. Neat handwriting, Daniel Gray, January 1987. I felt something shift inside me. The gray man. He wasn't just something without identity. He had a name, a real one. He had lived here. This wasn't just a presence. It had been a person. I held the photos in my hands, trying to steady myself. Then I looked back into the box. There were letters, dozens of them, all handwritten, and a dark blue notebook that looked like a journal. The pages were worn from time and humidity, but still readable. I didn't open it yet. Something else had caught my attention. The third thing was what made everything make sense. At the back wall, partially hidden behind the table, there was an old metal pipe running vertically, from the ceiling down to the floor. Near the bottom, close to the ground, there was a joint, and it wasn't sealed properly. It hadn't broken suddenly. It had slowly given in over time. There was a small gap, barely noticeable, just a few millimeters. In a sealed basement like that, it shouldn't have mattered. But the basement wasn't perfectly sealed. There were small cracks in the concrete, tiny gaps in the bricks, and the house was over 80 years old. Nothing that old is ever completely closed. I stepped closer and focused the flashlight on the pipe. There was no strong smell, nothing obvious. But the corrosion around the joint, the way the metal had changed color, it told me enough. Something had been leaking, slowly, for a long time. I didn't wait. I turned around and went straight back up the stairs, faster than I had come down, carrying the metal box under my arm. The photos still in my hand. When I reached the backyard, everything felt wrong, too normal. The sun was up, birds, distant traffic, the smell of grass, like nothing had changed. My wife, Sarah, was standing by the back door, holding a cup of coffee, watching me. She had that same look she'd been carrying for weeks, tired, alert, like she was always expecting something else to happen. "I found something," I said. My voice sounded different, even to me. "What kind of something?" she asked. "Several things." I paused, then added, "And I need to call a gas technician. Today." She frowned. "Why?" "Because there's a broken pipe in the basement, and this house is 80 years old." I looked at her. "And in a few weeks, when winter comes, we're going to close all the windows." She stared at me for a second, then her eyes shifted to the metal box in my hands, then back to me. "Who was the gray man?" she asked quietly. "I don't know everything yet," I said, "but I know his name." I swallowed. "And I know he buried his dog down there." She didn't say anything, just opened the door and stepped aside, letting me in. Inside, Ethan was sitting on the stairs, still in his dinosaur pajamas, holding a cup of orange juice with both hands. He looked at me calmly. "The gray man says you found Sunny," he said, then added, "He says thank you for not moving him." I nodded, because I didn't have anything else to say. I went into the kitchen, put the metal box on the table, and grabbed my phone with hands that were still dirty from the basement. Outside, the concrete slab was leaning against the wall. The basement was open for the first time in 6 years, and somewhere in that house, something that had been waiting for a long time had finally been found. The gas technician arrived around 10 in the morning. He was the kind of man who didn't talk much. Worn boots, a heavy toolbox, and the habit of focusing only on the job in front of him. Exactly what I needed that day. I showed him the backyard and the open basement. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, just nodded and went down with his equipment. He stayed down there for about 20 minutes, long enough for me to start imagining things I didn't want to imagine. Sarah stood next to me in the kitchen, arms crossed, watching the backyard through the window. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. When the technician came back up, his face had changed. I had seen that expression before, at the hospital, when the doctor told us about the pregnancy. It wasn't panic. It was something quieter, controlled, serious. "The pipe's been leaking for a while," he said. Slow leak. Could be 3, maybe 5 years. My stomach dropped. He kept talking. It's a low level, so you wouldn't notice right away. And that type of line, it doesn't have the smell they add in newer systems. No smell, no warning. In the summer, with windows open, air moving, it spreads out, he explained. But in winter, he paused, looked at the house, then back at me. With everything closed, heat on, no ventilation, it builds up. I already knew what he was going to say next, but I needed to hear it anyway. With a leak like that, in a house this size, he took a breath. After 4 to 6 weeks, the levels would get dangerous, especially at night. Sarah stepped closer to me, not touching, but close enough. Someone could go to sleep, he said, and not wake up. Exactly what Ethan had said. I nodded slowly, told him to fix everything, whatever it took, as fast as possible. He went back down to start working. I stayed in the kitchen, sitting at the table, looking at the metal box. I opened it again, this time more carefully, like what was inside mattered in a different way now. The photographs first. Daniel Gray in the backyard. Daniel Gray sitting in what was now our kitchen. Same layout. Different furniture, different life. In every photo, he was alone, except for the dog, Sunny, always there, at his feet, next to him, looking at him. I noticed something else. Every photo was taken in spring or summer, never winter. Not a single one. It said something about the kind of loneliness he lived with, the kind that hides when it's warm and becomes unbearable when everything closes in. Then I picked up the letters. They were all handwritten, small, careful handwriting. At first steady, then less consistent over time. Like the person writing them was losing certainty, but not effort. They were all addressed to the same person, Emily. I started reading. They weren't love letters. Not exactly. They were something harder to define. They felt like practice, like someone trying to say things they couldn't say out loud. Emily, it was sunny today. I thought about when you used to run in the yard. Emily, I made that soup you liked. I didn't know what to do with the rest. Sunny stayed by my feet all afternoon. I remembered you were the one who named him. I kept reading, one after another. Same tone, same effort, a father trying to reach his daughter, without knowing how. The last letter was different. It didn't have a date, and it was shorter. If you ever read this, I want you to know I never stopped waiting for you. The house was always yours too. I'm sorry I didn't know how to say it before. That was it. It had never been sent. Still folded, still inside the envelope. No address, no stamp, just a name written on the front. Emily. A letter that never reached anyone, because the person who wrote it didn't know where to send it, or maybe didn't know how. I sat there for a long time, just looking at it. Then I started searching, using the name, old records, property history, anything I could find. It didn't take long. Daniel Gray died in this house in 2011, 78 years old, widower, lived here for over 40 years. The property had been sold by his heirs, handled through a legal office. There was a contact listed, Emily Gray, different last name now, living in another state, over 600 miles away. I stared at the screen. Emily, the same name on the letters. When Sarah came back into the kitchen later that afternoon, she found the table covered, photos, letters, the open box. She didn't say anything at first. Just sat down slowly, looked at everything. Who was he? She asked. A man who lived here alone for years, I said, waiting for his daughter to come back. I paused. He buried his dog in the basement because he didn't want to let him go. I looked at the letters. He wrote to her, but never sent them. Sarah picked up one of the photos, held it for a moment, then placed it back down carefully. And the gas? She asked. They're fixing it now, I said. Another few weeks with the house closed, and it would have been enough. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, then opened them again. Can we find her? She asked. I think so, I said. I have a number. From the hallway, we heard Ethan's voice. He had just come inside, still wearing his shoes, asking for milk. Sarah stood up to go to him. I stayed at the table, looking at the phone in my hand. Outside, the technician was finishing the repairs. The house carried a faint smell from the work. Not danger, the opposite. Something that had almost happened, but didn't. And on the table in front of me, there was something else. Something that hadn't been finished. And now, it was waiting. I found Emily's number 2 days earlier, but I hadn't called. I kept putting it off. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to start that conversation. There's no normal way to say something like that. Hi, you don't know me. I live in your father's house, and my 5-year-old son has been receiving messages from him. There's no version of that sounds reasonable. But now, Ethan had said there was one thing left, and I knew exactly what it was. I picked up the phone, dialed the number, and waited. It rang longer than I expected, long enough for me to almost hang up. Then someone answered, a woman's voice, tired. Not the kind of tired you get from a bad day, the kind that builds over years. I told her my name, told her I lived in the house that used to belong to her father, told her I had found something in the basement, letters, photos, things I believed she needed to see. There was silence on the other end, long, heavy. Then she asked something I didn't expect. Did you find Sunny? That question told me everything. It wasn't random. It wasn't a guess. She needed confirmation. Yes, I said. I found him. He's in a wooden box with a metal plate. Another pause. Shorter this time. My father, she started, then stopped. Tried again. My father told me about you. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. That didn't make sense. He had been dead for over a decade. Then she explained, I mean, I dreamed about him last week, she said quietly. He told me someone would call, that I should listen. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't try to explain it. I just told her the truth. I told her about the letters, that he had written to her, that he never sent them, that the last one said he had never stopped waiting, that the house had always been hers too, that he was sorry. I heard something on the other end of the line, not exactly crying, something before that, something that had been held in for a long time, finally finding a way out. It took her almost a full minute before she could speak again. I need to come, she said. Can I come to the house? Yes, I said. Anytime. When I hung up, Sarah was standing next to me, arms crossed, eyes bright. She hadn't cried, but she was close. She didn't mention leaving the house. Not that night. Not again. We went upstairs together to check on Ethan. He was already asleep, breathing slowly, peacefully. We stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him. The window in his room was open, like the doctor had recommended. The curtain moved slightly with the cold air coming in from outside. Just the wind, nothing else. But for the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel afraid. I felt something different, something I hadn't felt in a long time, like we were getting close, to the end of something, not the kind of end that takes something away, the kind that finally puts things where they're supposed to be. Emily arrived 3 days later. She drove over 6 hours, alone. She said she needed the time to prepare. She was in her early 60s, short white hair, and the way she moved. It told you she had been carrying something heavy for a long time. Even if she didn't say it, she stood outside the house for a while before coming in, just looking at it. The yard, the windows, the second floor. Then she said quietly, "It looks the same, like time didn't really move here." Sarah welcomed her inside, gave her tea, the kind of warmth you offer someone when you know they're walking into something difficult. Ethan watched her from the stairs, careful, quiet, the way he always was with strangers. Emily looked at him, and something in her expression changed, softened. "That boy has his eyes," she said quietly. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. We gave her the box that afternoon. She opened it slowly, like she already knew what was inside. She read the letters one by one, from the oldest to the last. When she reached the final letter, she stopped, stayed there longer, read it again, then folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and held it in her hands for a long time, without saying anything. Finally, she spoke. "I left when I was 27, she said. "After my mother died." She swallowed. "My father didn't know how to be with me without her, and I didn't know how to stay." She looked down at the letters. "We both handled it the same way," she continued. "We stayed quiet. I moved away because I couldn't stand seeing him alone in this house, and not knowing how to fix it. And he stayed here, because he didn't know how to find me without words." She paused. "I wrote to him once," she said, "when my son was born. I sent him a picture." She shook her head slightly. He never answered. She looked at the letters again. "Now I understand. He didn't know how. We were the same, waiting for the other one to take the first step." Sarah's eyes filled again. I just sat there, thinking about Daniel Gray writing that last letter. No address, no date, just hope. And somehow, that letter had found its way, through a 5-year-old boy. Later that day, Emily asked something I wasn't expecting. "Can I talk to your son?" Sarah and I looked at each other, not out of doubt, more like confirmation. We both understood what that meant. Sarah went upstairs to get Ethan. He came down a minute later, still wearing his dinosaur pajamas. Even though it wasn't time for bed, he had changed into them after playing outside and didn't want to take them off. He sat on the small chair across from Emily, calm, relaxed, like this was normal. Emily looked at him for a few seconds before speaking. "You're the one who talks to him?" she asked gently. Ethan thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yes," he said. "But he says he's your friend too." Emily's face shifted slightly. "He says he always was," Ethan continued. "He says he was never mad at you." Emily didn't cry right away. It came slowly. First her breathing changed, then her eyes, then her shoulders dropped, like something heavy had just been lifted. Ethan watched her quietly. "Can you tell him something for me?" she asked, her voice softer now. Ethan nodded again. "Tell him." She paused, trying to find the words. "Tell him I waited too." Her voice broke slightly. "I didn't know how to come back, but I waited." Ethan looked toward the corner of the room, the same corner, the one he always looked at. He stayed quiet for a few seconds, like he was listening. Then he nodded. "He says he knows," Ethan said. "He says he always knew." Silence filled the room, not empty silence, something heavier, full. Ethan got up from the chair, like nothing unusual had just happened. "Can I get some water?" he asked. Sarah stood up immediately and walked with him to the kitchen. Emily and I stayed in the living room. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. "My father had an imaginary friend when he was a child," she said. "My grandmother told me once." I looked at her. "He used to say the same things," she continued. "That his friend told him things, that he knew things." She shook her head slowly. "They thought it was just imagination." She looked toward the hallway where Ethan had gone. "I don't know what to call what just happened here," she said. "But I know it was real." I didn't argue with that. I couldn't. That night, Emily stayed in the house. She slept in the back room, the one that used to be hers when she was a child. She recognized it immediately, said it hadn't changed as much as she expected. Before going to bed, Ethan knocked on her door. When she opened it, he handed her one of the photos. Daniel Gray, sitting in the yard, Sunny at his feet. "For you," Ethan said. "He says it's yours." Emily took the photo carefully, held it like it mattered. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, then walked away. Like that was all. That night felt different. Not lighter, but settled, like something that had been open for too long was finally closing the right way. The next morning felt even clearer. Something was ending. I could feel it, not in a dramatic way, just certain. Emily stayed for 3 days. The first day, she walked through the house slowly, touching things, looking at the walls, taking her time. The second day, she spent most of it in the kitchen with Sarah, talking, the kind of conversation that doesn't need explanations. The third day, before breakfast, she came to find me in the backyard. I was sitting there with a cup of coffee, looking at the basement, now repaired, sealed again. "I need to do one more thing before I leave," she said. I looked up at her. "I want to say goodbye to him," she said, "and I want to do it the right way." She hesitated. "Do you think Ethan can help?" We hadn't heard Ethan mention the gray man in days, not since the night he gave her the photo, and I had been avoiding asking, because something about that silence felt fragile. But this wasn't breaking it. This was finishing it. I looked at Sarah. She thought for a moment, then said, "Let's ask him." Ethan was upstairs, sitting on the floor, working on a puzzle. I asked him if the gray man was still visiting him. He placed one more piece before answering. "He comes less now," he said. "He says he's tired." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Tired of what?" I asked. Ethan looked at me. "Of waiting." I swallowed. I asked him if he could help us say something to him from Emily. Ethan nodded, without hesitation. And just like that, we knew what was going to happen next. We gathered in the living room that afternoon, all 4 of us, Sarah, Emily, Ethan, and me. We placed the metal box on the table again, open. Even though it was empty now, it still felt like it needed to be there, like it belonged to that moment. Emily held the last letter in her hands, the one without a date, the one that had never been sent. Ethan sat in his small chair, feet not touching the floor, looking toward the same corner as always, focused, quiet. Sarah sat next to me. She took my hand without saying anything. I didn't move. Emily was the first to speak. She didn't look at Ethan. She looked at the corner, at the space he was watching. "Dad?" she said, her voice steady but soft. "I know you can hear me." She paused. "You always could, even when we didn't know how to talk." Her grip tightened slightly on the letter. "I read everything you wrote," she continued. "All of it." Another pause. "I kept the last one." Her voice wavered just a little. "I'm sorry I left and didn't come back." She took a breath. I let time pass, thinking there would always be another chance. Her eyes filled, but she kept going. "I was wrong." Silence. "I want you to know you were a good father." That one stayed in the air, heavy, even if we didn't know how to be there for each other. She looked down for a moment, then back up. "You don't have to wait anymore." Her voice softened even more. "I'm okay." A long pause. "The house is okay." She glanced around briefly. "The family living here, they're taking care of it." She exhaled slowly. "You can rest now." The room went completely still. Not empty, not quiet in a normal way, full. Ethan's eyes moved slightly, following something, slowly, from the corner, across the room. He didn't rush, just watched. Then his gaze stopped, right in front of Emily. "He says he knew," Ethan said quietly. "That he always knew." Emily closed her eyes, tight. Ethan continued. "He says the house isn't his anymore." A small pause. "He says it belongs to this family now." Another pause. "And that's how it should be." Sarah's hand tightened around mine. Ethan's eyes moved again, toward the window this time. "He says Sunny is waiting for him." Emily pressed the letter against her chest. "He says he can go now." No one spoke. Ethan kept watching, following that same slow movement. From the center of the room to the window. The curtain moved slightly, even though the windows were closed. Then, nothing. Stillness. Ethan blinked, looked around, then back at us. "It's over," he said simply, just like that. He got up from the chair. "Can I get water?" he asked, like nothing had happened. Sarah stood and went with him. Emily stayed where she was, still holding the letter, breathing slowly, like someone who had been carrying something for years and had finally put it down. We didn't talk much after that. Some things don't need words. That night, Emily packed her things. Before leaving, she hugged Sarah, then me, tight, grateful. When she bent down to say goodbye to Ethan, she kissed his forehead. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "You're welcome." Simple. When her car disappeared at the end of the street, I stayed outside for a while, looking at the yard, the house, the quiet. For the first time since all of this started, it didn't feel heavy. It felt finished. But later that night, Ethan said something else. Something he said was just for me. That night, after Emily left, the house felt different. Not empty, just quiet, in a way it hadn't been before. We went to bed earlier than usual. Sarah fell asleep quickly, the kind of sleep that only comes after something heavy is finally over. I stayed awake a little longer, not out of fear, just thinking about everything that had happened. From that first morning at breakfast, to the basement, to the letters, to that moment in the living room. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember, Ethan was standing in the doorway, same as before. Pajamas, messy hair, calm. "Dad," he said. The gray man is here. I sat up immediately. He says this is the last time. I got out of bed quietly so I wouldn't wake Sarah. Followed Ethan down the hallway, down the stairs, into the living room. The box was still on the table, empty now. Ethan sat in his chair. I sat across from him. Morning light was coming in through the window. Soft, cold. Ethan looked toward the corner, then back at me. He says you need to take care of your family, he said. Better than he did. I felt that one. He says the biggest mistake he made was thinking staying quiet was the same as loving someone. Ethan paused. He says he waited, when he should have gone after her. I didn't move. He says you already understand that, Ethan continued, but he wants you to hear it anyway. My chest felt tight, but not in a bad way, in a clear way. Ethan kept going. He says the house is yours now, completely. A small pause. He says he's done here. Another pause. He says it was an honor, taking care of your family. That word stayed with me. Honor. Then Ethan added one more thing. He says the baby will come in the spring. I closed my eyes for a second. And that when you see her, you'll know her name. Ethan looked back toward the corner again. His eyes moved slowly, following something. This time, toward me. He tilted his head slightly, like he was listening closely. Then he says, thank you. That was it. Ethan kept looking for a few more seconds, then blinked, looked around, looked back at me. He's gone, he said. Just like that. No tension, no fear, just over. We stayed there for a while, in silence. Then Ethan stood up. Can we have pancakes? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, I said. We can. We went into the kitchen. I started cooking. Eggs, batter, pan. My hands didn't shake. That was new. Sarah came downstairs a few minutes later, looked at us, then at me. She didn't need to ask. Is it over? She said quietly. Yeah. I answered. It's over. She nodded, came closer, kissed my shoulder, sat next to Ethan. He ate 3 pancakes with honey, told us about a dream he had, a big field, bright sun, a golden dog running freely. He said his name was Sunny, Ethan said, and he looked really happy. Sarah looked at me. I looked back. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Some endings don't need words. In the weeks that followed, Ethan stopped talking about the gray man, not suddenly, just naturally, like kids do, when something has served its purpose. A month later, I asked him carefully if the gray man still visited him. He thought for a second, then said, no, he's okay now. And that was it. Spring came, and Sarah got pregnant again. This time, everything felt different. Not just medically, emotionally, lighter, steadier, like something was right. The doctors confirmed it. Healthy, strong heartbeat, no complications, a girl. When we heard that, neither of us was surprised. We already knew. The night she was born, Sarah held her for the first time, looked at her, and said her name immediately. Emily. I didn't question it. It was the right name. We both knew it. We sent a message to Emily that same day, with a photo. She replied within minutes. It's a beautiful name. He would be happy. The first night our daughter slept in her room, I stood by the door for a while, watching her breathe. Small, quiet, perfect. The room was still. No movement, no presence, just my daughter, sleeping. I whispered softly, to no one in particular, thank you, Daniel. Nothing answered, and for the first time, that was exactly what I needed.